No, that's my next question. What do you think, or what would it take to change that? I mean, obviously, white culture doesn't realize at all how oppressed black culture still is, and black culture has been so oppressed that a lot of people have given up. There aren't a lot of really strong black leaders in America. There isn't a strong desire to have, a continuance of the civil rights movement. Like, what do you think it would take to change, or what do you think needs to give?
And adding one more thing to what the list you just gave is there's surprisingly little interaction between white and black culture. I mean, people naturally gravitate towards people like themselves, and when there are historically institutional barriers between that makes what might naturally happen of hanging out with yourself, that makes the interaction far, far, far harder. And so we simply don't know each other that well on a day-to-day basis. And this leads to, well, among other things, many misunderstandings. Things that one person thinks is joking around, another person takes far too seriously. And it's hard to change this because it is so entrenched. And I'm not really sure. I mean, the status quo in American society tends to stay status quo. It's really hard to buck the status quo. And when it is bucked, it's very, very gradual. And the only way you really see it is when you look back 10 to 20 years and measure it. Because it has been so gradual, if you live through it, you don't see it. But then you look back and you go, wow, there have been changes. And so how to change it in terms of media, is to stop watching what is offensive. But that requires being aware of what is offensive. And because we so much take it for granted, we don't notice it. We just absorb it without really thinking about it. About 5-10 years ago, the NAACP threatened boycotts against the major networks. They decided they were going to pick one network and boycott it. Then if a change was made, move on to another network. They realized that was the only way to show their effect, to show their target. As it turns out, the networks ran scared and made some changes. Most of those changes were largely cosmetic in front of the screen. For instance, all of a sudden in the 9th or 10th season, there was a black character on Friends. Aisha Tyler, who became the girlfriend of one of them. And so all of a sudden shows that it never had a black character had a black character. And so that's a bit of a change, but there wasn't as much of a change behind the screen, behind the scenes, as camera operators, as technical crews, as producers, and so on and so forth. And which is what the NAACP was also fighting for. And so what this meant was, when, yes, you had more black faces on TV, but no more black faces behind the screen, you were getting black actors being told how to act by white producers, directors, writers, and so on and so forth. And so even though there were black faces, they were acting out the white image of what blackness was instead of true blackness. A friend of mine, David Mills, wrote for TV. And he started out he started out on Homicide in Baltimore. His friend David Simon wrote the book, and the two of them wrote a script together and had it produced, and that gave David Mills the book, and he moved out to LA to make it in TV. And he was a light-skinned black man. Many people didn't realize he was black. And so he was privy to a lot of discussions that would probably not have been held in front of him if they had realized he was black. And he was surprised by the racism behind the screen. Well, not that there was some, but the degree to which it was, the assumptions that were made. And there was a producer on NYPD Blue that actually made a public statement about the reason there are so few black writers, directors, and so on and so forth is because they just don't exist. It's not that we aren't looking for them, it's that they aren't there to hire. Needless to say, David was very offended by this statement and very publicly responded to it. And I will give the producer his due. He immediately hired David Mills on the spot. I think probably there was an element of, okay, put up or shut up. And there may have been assumptions that he would fail and this would prove the producer's point. But instead, he flourished and became a regular writer on the show, and then a story editor, and eventually moved on to ER and had a very successful career in TV. And so these assumptions still plague us, and because they're behind the scenes, most people are not privy to them, are not aware of them, and they just accept that most of the black depictions we see on TV, with the rare exceptions of new sitcoms on fledgling networks like the Tyler Perry shows, and before it, things like Living Color and various sitcoms like that. Everybody Hates Chris. Sitcoms that are assumed to be for the black audience, not for the mainstream audience. Other than those, most of the depictions of blackness on TV are done by whites. So you can't help but perpetuate the white image of blackness there. You aren't getting the conflicting, the complex depictions that you would get if you had more interaction and behind the scenes race-wise.